A couple months ago, I was invited by Mazda Canada to participate in their launch event for the 2021 Mazda CX-30 GT all-wheel drive. But unfortunately, things here in Quebec haven't been that great with the pandemic, so they decided for safety to cancel it and just allow the journalists to drive the cars normally a little bit earlier than we normally would. Now, we are featuring this 2021. It comes fully loaded as the GT here, and we are going to be going over what you need to know if you're in the market for this. Now, what does the CX-30 represent? Well, this is a subcompact crossover. It is bigger than the CX-3, which we have featured before, and obviously smaller than the CX-5. Gives you a little bit more trunk space and slightly better interior dimensions than the CX-3, but kind of like some of the vehicles in this segment, you can think of it as a lifted Mazda 3 hatchback. The specifications are slightly different. This has a shorter wheelbase, it's a little bit shorter overall, but it is a little bit wider than the Mazda 3 hatchback. You have better headroom, both in the front and the back, and slightly better rear legroom, but you lose out on front legroom. Also, the trunk size is bigger. However, if you fold the seats flat, the Mazda 3 ends up having more space. So it's sort of close, not quite like the Subaru Crosstrek that we featured that is literally an Impreza with a lift kit. And it's not different like our long-term Kia Seltos, which isn't anything like any of the other vehicles in Kia's portfolio. This is pretty similar to what we've driven with the Mazda 3 and fits in line well with what Mazda has to offer. Now, there are a couple things to note about this GT Turbo all-wheel drive compared to something like the Mazda 3 that we drove. There's no 360-degree camera system, and you don't have front parking sensors, but you do get a power rear liftgate, so that's a nice plus. MSRP for this is below both in US and Canadian dollars, but as tested, we're looking at about $650 more than the Mazda 3 GT Turbo that we drove. But we do have some different rims on here, so that kind of pushes the price up. So for the most part, it's about the same price. If you're looking at that fully loaded Mazda 3 or the CX-30, the benefit of this, obviously, is better ground clearance. Now, I know what you're thinking. Is Mazda turning into a one-trick pony? Because they're essentially just putting their 2.5-liter SkyActiv turbo engine in everything. I mean, we first had it in the CX-9, and then when we got it in the CX-5, everybody was excited, and then they put it in the Mazda 3, and now it's in the CX-30. So, I mean, pretty much everything has this engine now, except for the CX-3 and the MX-5, which maybe they're going to get them too. This makes it one of the more powerful vehicles in the segment, coming in at 227 horsepower with regular fuel, 310 pound-feet of torque. That's probably the number that will be most important. I don't see anybody putting 93 octane in here. That would bump things up to 250 horsepower, 320 pound-feet of torque. So it depends. Already is kind of more expensive when it comes to fuel. We'll be talking about our fuel economy numbers on our road test, but I think most people are just going to put regular in this, but still at 227 and 310, it is more than any of the other vehicles that we've tested so far in this segment. It's pretty much in line with what you could get sort of at the mid to top end in the BMW Mercedes world without going into their performance vehicles. So, we know that Mazda is going towards the premium segment here. We know that they want to be considered higher up in the food chain than just your typical consumer vehicles. Does the CX-30 do it though? I don't know. We'll have to see as we take it on our road test, but I can see that people are thinking, wow, Mazda is really just coming out with the same engine across the board for everything. That seems to be their little trick over the past couple of years. Now, you do get quite a bit with the CX-30. It does come very well loaded for this price. We have a lot of safety technology, which is important if you're buying this, whether it's for a small family or if you're commuting yourself to work. You do have adaptive front lights, a wiper de-icer with built-in wiper washers, which is always nice to have. We don't usually see that. Blind spot information, lane keep assist, forward collision alert, active cruise control, rear parking sensors with high definition camera, the smart brake rear support both for cross and regular backing up, lane departure warning, pedestrian detection, and the driver attention warning. So you are pretty much getting all the safety tech that we would expect, and at this price point, it is pretty good. Now, you do lose some features over some of the competition. We just have a regular sunroof, and there's no ventilated seats, but, again, in this segment, we don't normally find that. You do have front heated seats with a heated steering wheel, and there are air vents in the center console for the rear passengers, though there are no heated seats back there for them. Overall, though, we have a color head-up display, 12-speaker Bose audio system, full leather interior, and 2-zone climate control. Like I mentioned, we lose out on some of those top-end features, and we also don't get wireless phone charging here, although it is an accessory that you can add in the States. But I just want to mention real quick, we've driven the Mazda CX-30, we've driven a number of other subcompact crossovers. You can see in the B-roll when I sit in the back seat, first of all, impossible for me to sit behind myself. The front passenger really has to be up quite a bit for me to fit. It might not be a vehicle for a larger family. If you've got a younger kid, much like we mentioned with the CX-3, that might be good. If they're in a car seat, that would be great because there isn't a ton of space on here. This is on the smaller side of the subcompact world, but you do have a sportier feel, which we'll be talking about now. Let's take it on the road and go over everything that you need to know if you're in the market for a subcompact crossover and you're considering the 2021 Mazda CX-30 GT Turbo all-wheel drive. All right, we're behind the wheel of the 2021 Mazda CX-30 Turbo. And I gotta say that there are a couple things that I noticed right away. We're gonna talk about that in a second. We gotta talk about the fuel economy on this bad boy, because it's not good. it's a little bit worse than what we drove with the Mazda 3. You can see the fuel economy numbers both in liters per 100 kilometers and US miles per gallon below. But it turned out to be about 0.4 liters per 100 kilometers worse than the Mazda 3 GT Turbo that we did, and that makes sense. You know, it's a smaller car, it's more aerodynamic in a lot of ways, and ultimately weighs less, so that makes sense. This is a crossover, it sits up taller, there's a little bit more weight to it, and yeah, you do feel it. It's not a fuel efficient vehicle. I've been averaging pretty high. In fact, I've done about just over 300 kilometers on this, which is low for what I used to do, but now we're in the pandemic, it's pretty average, and I'm averaging 11 liters per 100 kilometers. It's like mid-size crossover territory when it comes to that. So we don't use that number. Our test loop is the most important, but still, you're not buying this because you want something that is fuel efficient. You want it because you want to have something fun and enjoyable, and it certainly fits the bill. It's not as sporty as the Mazda 3 was, and that again makes sense. You're sitting higher up, it's a heavier vehicle, so you're not getting that same experience, but the amount of power that you do get in this is pretty good. So if that's been your complaint, if you wanted more power in this subcompact crossover segment, here you go. Now back to what I said about the things that I noticed right away about the Mazda. Number one is the interior road noise on this is really good. It is so quiet in here. And that's the thing when it comes to this segment, usually because the cars are more affordable, they don't have as much soundproofing, sound deadening, so it's a little louder as you're driving along. But I have to say that this thing is really, really quiet. It's really nice. And Mazda has done small things to make the experience even better. The turn signals, for example, they're super quiet, and you can change the actual level that it sounds when you're turning in the car, but they're like a pulse. It's like a heartbeat almost. They're not just on, off, on, off. It's really nice. It's a gradual on and off, and it looks pretty cool, and that translates onto the gauge cluster as well. So small things like that help, but overall the interior road noise here is really good for the segment. Second thing I noticed immediately when I drove this is just how smooth it is on the road. Compared to, again, other subcompact crossovers that we've driven, this really does excel at smoothness. When you go over bumps, you don't feel it quite as much. It's not harsh like it is in a lot of the other vehicles. So you're getting a soft feel, a quiet interior. Yeah, space, okay, you lose out compared to the Mazda 3, and this really is small on the segment. You don't have a ton of space in the back, but I'm comfortable here for a subcompact. So this might be a good option if you are alone, you're driving to and from work, whatever it may be, you don't have a family, or again, your kids are pretty young, they're small in car seats, they should be fine. I don't think 2 adults would be overly comfortable in the back. 3 would be pretty much impossible to get in there. So this is not going to be your family vehicle in the same way that a lot of these subcompacts, like the Kia Seltos that we have long term, can be that replacement for the large family car, mid-size family cars. This is just a little bit smaller, but you do get the trunk space. That's kind of the key when it comes to this. Trunk space is pretty good for the segment. Overall, it works out well. But the selling factor for this is this engine, 2.5 liter turbo engine. We've seen it in everything now from Mazda. It's not necessarily a bad thing, but we do talk about that. But it's not quick, right? When I'm driving it, even if I put it in sport mode, it's not like the same experience that I had with the Mazda 3. Do I like it? Absolutely. Can I pass traffic and get onto the highway with no issues? Yes. Is it using premium fuel right now? I can guarantee you it is not. I don't feel like I'm getting the full power out of this, but again, that's why I say I don't think people who are going to be buying this are going to put premium in it. I think they're going to just put regular, because honestly, 227 horsepower is plenty fast for a vehicle like this. 310 pound-feet of torque is pretty ridiculous. You don't really need to get that little bump in power by having premium fuel. So it works for what you're buying it for. The downside is fuel economy. The downside is overall space and some comfort. Yeah, I'd say that the seats, this is probably the first time that I've driven a vehicle where I do have to complain about the seats. I know a lot of people ask, I'm a big guy, how do I find a lot of these vehicles? And for the most part, I'm usually comfortable, but I don't feel there's enough leg support here. My legs end like halfway before the halfway point where the seat ends. So it's not the most comfortable, but it's also not uncomfortable either. It just doesn't excel in that department. I've driven a number of vehicles in this segment. The Mazda CX-3 absolutely looks great. It performs really well. Pricing is, more or less on par for what you're getting. But I don't know, I feel that there isn't enough about this to really make you want to buy it. It should be on your list. It depends on what you're looking for. But there isn't that super wow factor. And that's what's a little disappointing. And it's probably now because we've driven so many vehicles from Mazda that incorporate the 2.5 turbo as the selling feature. It is getting a little tired. I'd like to see something different. It is nice that Mazda has a vehicle like this, but the whole time I've been driving it, the whole drive around, and every time I look at the fuel gauge and see that it's almost empty because the gas tank is small, and I realize how much fuel I'm spending in it, I really realize how much better this car would be if it were just fully electric.